Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and it is finally time, I know I'm a little late, to talk about the roster reveal for Kislev. So, we're actually getting pretty close to the game's release date being announced, and of course, moving on to things besides Kislev and Khorne, which I think everyone's ready for, now that we've gotten really the last piece of the puzzle, which is the roster reveal. I think really the only thing left for Kislev and Khorne, because they're kind of packaged together, is obviously we need the Khornate roster, and then they might do starting locations, but I don't think they're going to do that yet. I think they're going to reveal the full map later, because I imagine since we're going to the Realm of Chaos, the map's going to be pretty insane. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the Kislev roster, and I will discuss my thoughts on it. I know a lot of people are curious about some things, and there's also a lie in this. There is a lie, a huge lie, a dishonorable lie, a deep lie. And that lie is right here at the top. The top, there we go, top. Ascending to the throne and crown in wake of her father's bloody death, fighting against the hordes of chaos. Katerin has wasted no time cementing her grip upon Kislev. False! Absolutely false. If you go and check out my interview with the developers of Total War Warhammer 3, you will hear them say that Boris is merely presumed dead. He was last seen heading into the Realm of Chaos and has not been seen since. And in the wake of his disappearance, Katerin has ascended to the throne. Boris lives! Boris lives! Stomp thy feet! Boris lives. We do not give up on Boris in this house. We do not. Anyway, let's move on with the roster. So, Katerin comes with the Lore of Ice. She also has two magical weapons, or items, sorry. She has Frostfang, her weapon that gives her a big explosion spell, and she has the Ice Cloak, the Cloak of Ice, whatever it's called. But if you want to see those items specifically, if you go check out my gameplay trailer of Total War Warhammer 3 when I got to play the Brass Citadel experience, they gave us Katerin. It seemed like she was fully upgraded because she actually had Frostfang and her cloak, which the cloak gives her a ward save whenever she's casting magic, and Frostfang gives her that big explosion ice ability that you can see quite a few people using that. But unfortunately, Katerin is not quite what I wanted, which is that she doesn't have her sled. And I'm really, really disappointed by the lack of sled. She could take a warhorse or a warbear. And we're going to save it, I think, for the... No, let's go ahead and talk about it. So, I honestly have one big problem with the Kislevite roster. And that is simply that I don't think the Ice Witches should have bear mounts. I don't. I think it's really bizarre that the bears are available to literally every single character choice. I could totally understand if the Supreme Patriarch and the priests and the boyars are able to ride bears. I think that's totally fine. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But really, the Katerin on a bear? Katerin never rode a bear. She never rode a bear. I don't like this. I think they should take it out. Honestly, for me, this kind of feels like the Tomb Kings all over again, where the Tomb Kings, like, in their lore and in their design, the reason all of their fighting characters, the Tomb Princes and the Tomb Kings, have chariots is because they weren't supposed to ride horses. In the lore of the Tomb Kings, there's a whole thing about how they view the Tomb King culture views horses as like these dirty, filthy creatures of the earth that no royal would ever be caught dead touching. So they refuse to ride horses. And then Total War kind of goofed that up, because I guess somebody at Games Workshop didn't catch it, even though it's like really obvious in the book. There's like a whole little passage dedicated to it. But to me, this feels like that. I don't think they should be allowed to ride warbears. I don't. Like, to the extent that I would say that I would encourage CA to remove this. I would encourage CA to disable the warbears for the Ice Witches and for Katerin. I'm really disappointed Katarine did not get her unique mount. You could take her on a sled way back in the day, and I think the sled is an excellent pick because it's kind of a good call. It kind of calls heavily to, the mythos of the Ice Queen, especially when at least to like Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, where the queen there has the little sled. It's literally that. I would not even be surprised if whoever the Games Workshop writer back in the day who wrote Katarine's lore literally had like the Lion, the Witch in the Wardrobe Ice Witch on one hand, and he had the original myth in the other hand. He was like, oh, this is cool, and just threw it together. I mean, that's what Warhammer is. Warhammer is the grand junction between a truly staggering number of different universes and histories and mythologies. And I really think they kind of missed the marker on this one. I love that Katarine, floats around on ice when she's on foot. I think they honestly probably put a little too much effort into that animation. But considering that most people are probably just going to throw her on her mount pretty quick, but it looks cool. But yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I don't think the Wizards should be riding Warbears. I think that's just as strange as putting... I just don't know. Wizards... It should be exceedingly rare that Wizards ride heavy combat mounts. And to me, a Warbearer is a very heavy combat mount. And I'm just not a fan of it. Ice Witches do not strike me, and they never have struck me as frontline fighters. They are much more like traditional wizards. They're an all-female, not cult, but, I talk about it in the Ancient Widow lore video, where the ice witches are not frontline fighters. They're very traditionally people that would kind of hang in the back and do all this stuff. And Katarine just never rode a bear. I mean, even during the end times, very modern Warhammer Fantasy lore, when they wrote the short story, I think it's called Blood in the Snow, which is about Katarine and her, basically her death and the death of Kislev. There's like a whole thing where she even finds Erskine again, which Erskine is Tsar Boris's personal bear, who you will note it's not in the roster, even though Erskine is actually a big deal. Erskine's kind of like the Nakai almost of Kislev or the Green Knight. He just kind of like shows up places and kicks ass. But even when Erskine shows up, which, her father's been long dead, and Erskine and Katarine have a relationship because they both deeply love Tsar Boris, she doesn't mount him and use him, she doesn't ride him into battle and use him as a mount. She fights alongside Erskine and, like, rides a horse, but she never rides a bear. I think giving Katarine and the Ice Witches bears is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. Granted, I'm totally, like, I could just not choose the option. That's fine. If they don't want to disable it, they don't have to, by any means. But I think it's a terrible decision, and sets kind of a spooky precedent. One of the things I'm getting off on a huge tangent, I'm sorry, but one of the things I'm the most worried about in this game that I get really salty on, and I need CA to stop, is I don't know who does it, but there's basically someone at CA that keeps weaponizing wizard mounts unnecessarily. Like, they keep giving wizards that were traditionally either not mounted or very lightly mounted, and then giving them these, like, bizarre super mounts. I mean, we've got freaking Techless on an Arcane Phoenix, which is total bullshit, and, like, that's... I don't like it. I feel like this is that crap all over again, where they're like, oh, well, we have the mount, we have the animation, so let's just use it. And just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should, CA. There are, just because you could put Gorst in the game doesn't mean you should. Just because you could put Katarine on a bear doesn't mean you should. I think it's dumb. I think it's really dumb. I would heavily encourage CA at some point, maybe, to consider doing the Katarine's sled. I would love to see her sled pulled by Indrika, which I will try. I'll add a little thing at the end of the video to talk about Indrika and what they are and all that stuff. But I really think they should set aside some time to put that into the game. Honest. But anyway, let's keep moving. We'll come back to that at the end of the video, but I will go ahead and say that I think every single character in the Kislev roster having a bear mount is utterly ridiculous. That should be saved for purely melee characters, or characters that are, like, designed to just get thrown into combat and stay there, which Wizards should not be doing that. particularly Ice Witches. You know, Chaos Sorcerer Lords, okay, fine. But, yeah, no. Anyway, Supreme Patriarch Kostaltin. We've seen a lot about Kostaltin already. We do, unfortunately, I don't know why they do this. They say selection of unique spells, abilities, or skills, and then they give two things, but they don't really tell you what they do. Like, Man of the People never lacks faithful loyal warriors to send into battle. What does that mean? Why do I care about this? That just don't, like, I feel like they should just not put this in if it's gonna be this vague and, like, not informational. Like, I guess they're like, oh, well, we don't want to commit to, like, raw numbers, but just tell me what it does. Is it like, oh, he has more recruitment slots? Or new units that he recruits are cheaper? Like, I just don't know what that does. That being said, I am very excited for Supreme Patriarch Kostaltin. I think giving Kislev a Rasputin character was a brilliant move, and I actually do like that he is opposed to Catering. He adds quite a bit of spice to Kislev by representing the religious orders, which, as we talked about in the Ancient Widow lore video, the Ice Court of the Ice Witches and the representatives of the Ancient Widow herself do not like the religions of Kislev. They have actually worked covertly very, very hard to prevent there being a state religion. So in the absence of Zarboris, Kostaltin being kind of this religious nut job who's sprung up in the absence of Zarboris and is really bringing all the cults together and is threatening to make a state religion, he would absolutely be something Katerin would despise. So I think the two of them being opposed while still, you know, having to fight against chaos is great. Kislev Lords, the Boyar, looks awesome. Warhorse or Warbear, I think is totally great for the Boyar, makes perfect sense. I think they're going to be a fantastic staple character. Supreme Patriarch Kostaltin, I mean, he's primarily a worshipper of Ursun, so obviously he should have a bear mount. I think that's great. The Ice Witch, I'm actually really pleasantly surprised with the Ice Witch. When I heard about the Lore of the Tempest, I had no idea what it was. I think calling it the Lore of the Tempest was really weird. I'm going to be honest. I think it should have been called, like, Lore of the, like, I don't know, maybe the Lore of Hail or the Lore of Blizzard or something. I don't know. But when I hear Tempest, usually I think like a hurricane, like a wet giant storm with lots of rain and stuff. Like, when I hear Tempest, I associate that with rain. Maybe Tempest means more like precipitation as opposed to just flat rain. But I will say that Tempest, when I heard Lord of the Tempest, I thought we were getting some kind of cultist of Daz, or of Tor, the god of thunder, but for Kislev. But nope, it's just an alternate form of the Lore of Ice, which I actually think is perfectly fitting and makes me feel much better about it. I was genuinely worried that they were just like making up a new wizard type, and I was concerned how that would fit into the lore of the Ancient Widow. I don't even know if the Ancient Widow is canonical anymore, to be frank, but I hope she is. I really like the Ancient Widow. But I think introducing the Lore of the Tempest to give us more of the spells that are associated with the Lore of Ice, because the Lore of Ice did used to be quite... the last time it was even written was in the Warhammer Fantasy 2nd Edition RPG supplement, Realm of the Ice Queen, and it was a big lore, and a number of the spells actually made it into this secondary lore, and I think it's great. You know, it gives you some variety. You're not stuck with just one lore of magic the entire game, which is fantastic, and it looks like a great lore. I actually like that it has the Hailstorm spell, which is a good call out, in my opinion, to so every Lore of Magic in 8th edition had 7 spells. There were the 6 main spells, and then there was what was called a signature spell. And the signature spells were basically really cheap spells that usually were very good, and you could take it an infinite number of times because it was just like the most basic spell. And for the Lore of Heavens, it was actually my favorite spell in the lore because it was so good. And it wasn't called exactly Hailstorm, but it was Hail Shard, Blizzard, or something like that. I don't remember. But it was a hail-related spell that had some really cool debuffs. It was very, very cost-efficient of a spell. So I don't know. I just found that that tickled me. That it kind of seems like it's coming back there. But I love the design. The character looks fantastic. And I'm really, really glad that they add another lore, but it's just the lore of ice in the air. You know, you've got like your ice on the ground and your ice in the air lores, which I think is totally fine and great. Once again, Warbear is stupid. They should get rid of that. Same thing for the Frostbane. Also very, very pleased. I will say immensely pleased that Kislev is showing up with 2 generic Lord types, and they get a fighter and a wizard. I think that should be standard for every single race in the game that has wizards, unless you're dealing with, like, you know, the chaos guys where they can, like, be a fighter and a wizard. But I think it's absolutely great that they're just starting off with the Boyar and the Ice Switch. I was genuinely worried it was going to be just the Boyar. For heroes, we got the Frostmaiden, fantastic, and then the Patriarch, perfect. So you've got your Warrior Priest character and your Frostmaiden. Once again, get rid of the bears on the wizards. That's dumb, thank you. Kislev units. Okay, so we gotta talk about this. I'm a little worried about the Kislevite lore. And the thing that I'm really worried about is, and you might remember this if you go back and watch my analysis of the announcement trailer for Total War Warhammer 3. One of the things, and my analysis of the Trial by Fire trailer. One of the most defining things about Kislev in the lore, like, is a colossal part of their lore, is that Kislev is a bit of a fragmented nation, because you have 2 different peoples from many, many hundreds of years ago who through time have been kind of forced together, and it's like an inseparable part of their lore, which are that you have the Ungol's and the Gospodars, and I've talked extensively about this. And the thing I noticed in the entire roster is they do not drop the word Gospodar or Ungol even once. And even though there are units that are clearly Ungols in design, they don't call them Ungols. Because in tabletop and even in the RPG and stuff like that, you did not have horse archers. You had Ungol horse archers, because the horse archers were all very specifically part of the Ungol tribes. Now, it could be that that's still there. They're just taking the name out of it to make it just, you know, kind of like focused on their role, where they're just like, okay, these are Cossars, and the horse archers, they're horse archers. I really hope they're keeping the Gospodar Ungol lore and conflict. It is critical to Kislev's identity. I don't even know how you could do Kislev without that lore, because the whole thing about Kislev is that the Gospodars, you know, met the Ancient Widow and did all that stuff way over in the east, on the eastern steppe, and then they worked their way west until they came to Kislev and took it over. And I really hope they don't erase all of that fantastical history. But anyway, the Cossars. I will say a positive thing. Let's focus on some positives. You know what? I'll save it for the end. All right. So Cossars. These are your absolute basic backbone troops. Very easy to get. One of the nice hybrid units. You could either have bow and axes if you want to go for more reliable melee attack. And probably damage, and then you've got bow and spear if you want anti-large and probably higher melee defense. But they both come with bows, which is absolutely great. Then we have the Strotzi, which the Strotzi, funny thing about them in this is that they actually bothered to, like, explain a little bit about the weapon. Because I know a lot of people, there was a fair amount, not a ton, but there was a good amount of people being like, but the Bardi... I don't know if they're called Bardiques or Bardiches, one of those. But I actually think that this is a way better design. They even, like, talk about it here, where they're, you know, it's like, they used to have the Bardiches and handguns, so they could, you'd plant the polearm, and then you'd put the firearm on the polearm and fire. But Kislev finally, you know, got to the point where they were like, you know what, we're not a huge fan of the fact that we gotta, like, fire and then put our gun up and then grab our weapon and pull it out and start fighting. And, you know, oftentimes when you've got chaos bearing down on you and you're just trying to pump as much black powder as you can into them, they were just like slapping them with their weapons anyway. So they just decided, you know what, let's just modify it to just be the same thing. And it is in fact actually based off a real weapon. And I kid you not, literally today, Shadiversity, who's a fantastic history-focused channel, well, history and warfare-focused channel, actually just did a video on the gun axe, which I will link in like a little card in the top right of the video, and I'll also put it in like the description in the top comment. You should absolutely go watch that if you are someone that's kind of like about this. I think it will greatly improve your opinion of the Streltsy. But then we have the Ice Guard. The Ice Guard are probably my favorite unit in the new Kislev design. And we do have the variants, which we saw in the screenshots a long time ago, where you have bow and dual sword, and then bow and glaive. I really like this unit design. Like, an elite, all-female warrior unit for a human faction, I think is really fun. I love their design. I love that because they're so used to guarding ice witches and ice queens and stuff, that they're used to wielding magical weaponry, and they're just used to ice magic. It actually really reminds me of the lore for like the Temple Guard for the Lizardmen, which is just that they spend so much time around the Slaanesh Mage Priests that they're very used to a lot of the weirdness with magic, because they're just so saturated in it. And I actually think this design is a really cool human version of that, and really gives Kislev more. It really helps bolster out the ice magic aspects of Kislev, which are significant, but used to kind of just be like, oh, you've got an ice witch and that's it. Now it's a little more widespread, which I appreciate. Armored Cossars. Love this unit because they've got pistols. I absolutely love pistols, and one of my biggest complaints about Warhammer, or Total War Warhammer, is that there are not nearly enough pistol wielders in the game. Particularly among the Skaven and the Dwarfs, especially. There are virtually, I don't think there's any pistol wielding units in those factions, which is stupid. They have tons of pistols, and I really would love to see them get some at one day. But like I still to this day cannot believe that the Lord level Clan Scarier characters don't have a shooting attack. They couldn't give them warp pistols. They couldn't give them warp lock pistols or warp muskets. Come on, CA, come on. But these guys look fantastic. Medium tier infantry. They're fairly heavily armored. You could have pistol, axe, and shield, or pistol and great mace. So these are the great mace guys we've seen, and the pistols are fantastic. Very limited ammo, but they just give you a quick pop, 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 pop. You know, they're basically javelin throwers. So like javelin skinks, except for instead of poison javelins that they throw and then, you know, run around, do stuff, they've got pistols, so they've got some really good punch to them, and then you throw away the pistol once your ammo's spent, and you get busy fighting, get busy dying. And you have a defensive version or an armor-piercing version. Fantastic. I really, really like the Armored Cossars. And then the Zargard, which we'll talk a little bit about the Zargard later, because there's something really interesting about them in contrast with the rest of the roster, but these are your elite heavy infantry. Very, very heavily armored, come with sword and shield, and the great sword, and they're very, very tanky, but, you know, probably going to be pretty slow. They are the personal guard of Katerin. I'm curious if they may have, like, any interesting synergy there. Like, I wonder if they'll have, like, an ROR at some point where maybe they'll have Guardian, or maybe if there'll be an upgrade to give them Guardian, so they can protect characters. I think that would be really fun. But, I mean, when you're dealing with a super elite infantry, sword and shield and great sword, you can't go wrong with that. I do think it's interesting there's not a halberd variant. It actually seems Kislev is a little lacking in the anti-large department. I think the only unit we've seen with spears so... Well, no, I mean, you've got glaives on the Ice Guard, so... And I guess, well, the Streltsy have gun axes now, not halberds. So, like, the only... I mean, there's an okay amount of anti-large. But I think a greatsword variant is going to be better considering the lore that Kislev is primarily fighting chaos. Like, in that case, you probably want great weapons more than you want halberds, to be frank. Better for slicing your way through, or just crushing your way through Chaos Warriors. Then we've got Kislevite Cavalry. So this is a weird unit. The Kossavite Dervishes. Strange name. This really just seems to be like regular Ungol horse riders. But Kossovite dervishes, you know, so they're Cossars on horses, essentially. But these are, once again, one of the Ungol units that are not being called among Ungols. But these are your Vanguard pure melee cav that are very, very fast. Hopefully they're incredibly fast. If anyone should have very, very, very fast cavalry, it is Kislev. Like, these guys spend their whole lives out in just the Oblast, dealing with the fact that chaos monsters or horse could come down at them at any moment and they would need to get the hell out of dodge. So hopefully they're just really, really hardcore when it comes to speed, but are maybe a little lacking in the other departments. You know, probably high charge bonus, high speed, but I'm sure the Kossovite dervishes will be a quintessential unit in early campaign, or especially in multiplayer. Just good for, you know, running off, fleeing enemies and stuff. The Winged Lancers! Very famous unit, of course. They look absolutely fantastic. I love their design. Even though they're kind of just ripped straight from history, and they're really, really fun. They cause fear, which is fantastic. They're shock cavalry, which is wonderful, but, you know, they can fight a little bit in combat, though you probably, you know, definitely you probably want to be cycle charging Winged Lancers so you're getting full effectiveness. I do kind of wish that they had been able to design it so that their fear is when they're charging, not all the time, but that probably would have been too much effort. But Fear Causing Cav is fantastic. And then the Griffin Legion, which, if you want horse riding Cav that's going to stay in combat and just beat the smack out of people, Griffin Legion is not a bad place to go. Though, once again, they're still shock Cav. And one thing I will say is I am glad they didn't verify the Winged Lancers in the Griffin Legion. I'll say it. I'm glad that there's at least a substantial amount of horse cav. There is more horse cav than there is bear cav. Just barely. Then Warbear Riders. This is obviously one of the most exciting units. The only thing I didn't like about Old Kislev was the lack of bears. I think there are too many bears now when it comes to the characters, but when it comes to units, I'm totally fine with all the bears, honestly. Warbear Riders are fantastic. I'm really excited to see them. You know, they're basically Demigryph equivalent. There's only one variant, which I actually thought was interesting. I was expecting there to be two variants, but nope, there's just one. You got your Warbear Riders with lances, but very, very heavily armored, and you can just throw them in combat and let them kick the crap out of people, which is fantastic. Kislev Missile Cavalry. We got the Horse Archers, which honestly should be called Ungol Horse Archers. But these guys are fantastic, you know, but they're just... they're just pretty straightforward missile cav. It does seem, based on this line down here, that the Kislev missile cav are probably a little bit more geared for combat as a mixed unit than traditional missile cav. So then they're probably going to be a little bit better at fighting than, say, Marauder Horsemen or Illyrian Reavers and stuff like that. The light war sleds. So the war sleds, honestly, I think the light and heavy war sled is totally great. I think that's a totally fine design. I do think that it would have been maybe a little bit more... it would have been a little bit more thematic to have it where the light war sled is pulled by horses and then the heavy war sled is pulled by bears. Hopefully there's just a massive stat difference between the two. Because they don't have any like actual art of the unit or in-game art of the unit, it's really difficult to tell what the difference is. Because, I mean, they kind of like vaguely describe them in combat, but they kind of seem the same in combat. Because they're like, oh, they've got black powder and shot, and they've got Streltsy and Cossars on them. And then down here, they're like, okay, so these are kind of more like the war wagons. They're very heavily armored. And they've got man-catchers, poleaxes, glaives, and spears with handguns. So, I just don't... I feel like this article does a really bad job of explaining what the hell the difference between these two units is. The only thing I understand to be the difference between the heavy war sled and the light war sled is that the heavy war sled is slower but more heavily armored. That is the only thing I can tell. And if that's the case, I'm a little disappointed with that design decision. I think that's very boring. I think it would have been a lot more thematic and interesting to have the light war sled maybe pulled by horses. It's notably faster. Maybe it's crewed by mostly Cossars, so there's like some bows, or at least spears, and then with the Threltsi bring, you know, the gun axes. But it's much more about like roaming around and pew-pewing than getting, you know, kind of like a classic Tyrannok chariot for the high elves versus a war lion chariot. You know, just a big difference, obviously, looking at them. For the heavy war sled, you know, it doesn't really specify what's going on with it, but I would have had this one pulled by bears, armored bears, and then have like the big armored Cossars on it, where they all have pistols and handguns, but then they've got really big weapons, which that kind of seems to be the case, but it's just really vague, and I'm not sure why they decided to be that vague with it. But let's move on. This is probably one of the most interesting entries, which is the Snow Leopard. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea where this came from. I don't remember there being a big focus on cats, big cats. The Snow Leopard is very cool. I like the design. I have no idea where it came from. If you had told me they were going to be doing a Kislevite beast, I would have thought they were doing Ice Fiends. But Ice Fiends are like giant bat monsters that are native to Kislev and are debatably elementals, not actual normal creatures. But the Snow Leopard looks really cool. I like its ornamentation. I like all the, like the jewelry and stuff it's got on to really like signify it as a beloved creature of like the elite ice court and stuff like that. We did have it confirmed in the Q&A that CA did on their own Discord that you can also summon Snow Leopards. They're not just units, they're also summons. Same thing with the Elemental Bear. I'm not sure what the summon is. It could be that it's one of the spells, but I've seen the entire Lore of Ice during the event that I did, and none of these spells were summon spells. So the only thing I can think of is a summon spell. Maybe the Hawks of Mishka? Maybe that could be a summon? The rest of these don't look like they're summon spells. Or maybe it's just an ability somebody has. But I literally have no idea where the summon is. That being said, I really like the Snow Leopard. It's very... I will say it's very odd that it's a single entity, considering its size. It really seems like one of those things that you would expect to be in a unit. Even if it was like just a unit of Ice Wolf type stuff, where it's like, oh, okay, it's... Well, I guess it's just a lot bigger than those, maybe. But I'm genuinely surprised it's not like in a unit of 8 or 12 or something. But from what I understand, it's supposed to be a very squishy beast, but it's super crazy fast. And is going to be really ideal for like picking off small targets. I will say, from a design perspective, especially when considering like from a battle perspective, a single entity that is extremely fast and hopefully has like absurdly high melee attack and high weapon strength, but not a lot of armor piercing, could be really strong for hunting down wizards. Because the problem with units when you're trying to snipe characters or like war machines and stuff is that because they're in a big unit, it's much easier to block them with another unit. You know, kind of like closing off gaps and stuff. As a single entity, if it's fast enough, this thing could be a pain in the ass to tie down. And it could be very, very strong at just weaving between units if carefully controlled, and just allow you to jump on a wizard or a ranged unit or a cannon or something and just rip it to pieces. So I'm going to be very, very interested to see how this thing performs in the actual game. It looks great, though. I'm very happy with the Snow Leopard design. I think it's great. I'm annoyed with myself. I thought it was a wolf so much. But in my defense, all the like the glowy effects make it hard to see its features in the trailers it was in. And then not last, but second to last, but certainly most, is the Elemental Bear. Absolutely beautiful design. This is a wonderfully inspired design. I love the Elemental Bear. I've gotten to play around with it. It's a ton of fun. It looks incredible. It definitely looks like it was very difficult to bring to life just because of the sheer amount of like nature-y stuff it's got going on top of all like the ice magic dripping off it and everything. But it looks fantastic. I love the Elemental Bear. I think it's a great unit. I do think it might be a little big. It's more in the ballpark of the Dread Saurian than any other monster. But I almost am like, shouldn't it be more like Stegodon size? But I guess if you're gonna have the land itself come to life and beat the snot out of someone, you'd want it to, you know, it would be better looking for it to be substantial. Giving Kislev a big scary monster was a bold decision. I like it. And the thing I will say this, the thing I love about the Elemental Bear is it drives a huge level of uniqueness to Kislev. There is no human faction that has a monster this freaking big, much less, you know, an elemental spirit of the land. And so I think this really helps Kislev stand apart from the Empire and stuff. And then there's Little Grom, which Little Grom is basically a skull cannon / iron blasters / every other cannon in the tabletop game that was also, you know, Stegodon / you know, every long-range artillery piece that is also a monster. Little Grom's a little different in that it's more like a monstrous cavalry cannon as opposed to a pure monster cannon. So I would put, say, the Iron Blaster, which is an Ogre Kingdoms unit pulled by a Rhinox, and the Stegodon in the same category. And then, you know, the Skull Cannon and Khorne and Little Grom seem like they're in the same category. I have played with this piece. It's an alright model. Little Grom's a little bumpy because it is difficult to aim. It's because it's a chariot, it's a little finicky when it's trying to like wheel on the spot to shoot at something. But it is a lot of fun, and I do like that it's very capable of fighting in close combat. I'm totally fine with it being pulled by bears. I think if you were going to be wheeling around a cannon, you'd want your biggest, baddest thing that you can get to listen to you to pull it around. Bears seem like a good choice. So Little Grom is great. And I also like they did not go crazy with Kislev on artillery. The Kislevites did not go heavy in artillery because for them artillery was suicide on the open battlefield. And that's the thing I want to talk about at the end of this roster. So I want to end on a positive note. And there is a huge positive to be, sorry, I need a drink of water, to be discussed right here, which is that I love the direction Kislev has been taken in, because for a faction whose lore revolves around fighting the legions of chaos on like the open fields of battle, which is where Kislev usually would encounter them and go out to fight them, this new roster makes perfect sense. And you know why it makes perfect sense? Because every single infantry unit except for the heaviest one are hybrid infantry. They all have guns or swords. It's an all hybrid faction with very minor exceptions. Like their cavalry is much more either melee or range, but even their ranged cav, all of their ranged cav are also melee fighters. You know, the horse archers are much better at fighting than other horse archers. Both of the war sleds have good charge bonuses and are pulled by bears, so they actually hurt a lot in close combat and on the charge. And then Little Grom is pulled by bears. Literally everything in this army that can shoot can fight. And that makes perfect sense if you're fighting chaos. Because when you're fighting the warriors of chaos, all they care about is getting you into combat. Because they don't have any range. You know, only range they're going to have is a hell cannon. Hell cannons, from a lore perspective, are pretty rare. And so if you're just constantly fighting the warriors of chaos, you need an army that's mobile and that can just pepper the hell out of the enemy. And then when they get close, bring out your weapons and beat the snot out of them. And I think they handled it perfectly with this roster. Literally the only complaints that I would leave at CA's door is I think this, and I blame it on the article for this particular point, I don't think they illustrated very well the difference between a light war sled and a heavy war sled. To me, it's just way too boring. I think if this is genuinely the only difference is that this one's armored and slow and this one's unarmored and fast, then they should have used horses. I think they should have used horses. But if there's more to it, then fine. And then also, I don't like the bear cav on the wizards. Or the bear mounts on the wizards. Those are honestly my only complaints. Besides the lack of Ungol and Gospodar stuff, but that's a lore thing, not a unit thing. So I would say, like, out of a 10 rating, with 10 being like, oh my god, this is amazing, like Vampire Coast roster, and a 1 being like, this sucks. I would rate Kislev's roster at like an 8. A really solid 8. I think if I would say they lose an entire point for giving Warbears to the Ice Wizards. I think that's a stupid decision, and I will continue to say that's a stupid decision. I think they should just rip it out. And then I would say that the Katerin not having her mount, or not having her unique mount, is also a big deduction. And then not having the and then the difference between the war sleds is a very minor deduction. I'm kind of reserving my judgment on the Gospodar and Ungol stuff. Maybe they didn't want to bog down this article by talking about it. I will say that if I get into the game and there's 0 mentions of Ungols or Gospodars, I'm going to be very upset. I'm going to be incredibly upset. That would be like, oh god, what's a good example? I'll have to think on it, like, as a good analogy. But it's just one of the really, you know what it would be like? A good example. It would be like going to play Bretonnia and finding out that there's 0 difference between the peasants and the knights. So finding out that, like, oh, maybe some of the peasants are knights, maybe some of the knights are like peasant infantry kind of guys. Like, there's no, you know, they just don't bring it up. Like, there's no such thing as peasantry, there's no mechanics around it or anything. That's how critical I consider the relationship between the Ungols and Gospodars. I think it is just as crucial as the relationship between peasants and nobility, or knights, in Bretonnia. So hopefully that can get across how big of a deal that is, and why I really hope CA... Granted, if CA was doing it, it would 99% be Games Workshop's fault. But I hope Games Workshop doesn't lose sight of what Kislev was in truth, to such an extent that they change them into something unrecognizable. I think for the most part, this is very recognizably Kislev. I just need more Ungol and Gospodar conversation. I need Katerin to get her war sled. CA, make it happen, guys. Like, we've got a long time till development, and y'all have sleds. You literally have sleds. You already have the sleds. Just stick Katerin in one and make it a little fancier. I don't know. Come on, CA, give us the sled. But that's going to be it for me today. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think of the roster down in the comment section. I would love to see y'all give it a rating. Let's not just have me being the pretentious asshole here. Give it as from a 1 to 10. 10 being best, like you absolutely love it and think that it's perfect, and a 1 being that you hated it completely and you think it sucks and should be burnt to the ground. Do include your reasoning, though. Please don't just throw a number at me. But, oh, the only other thing I'll say, this is really important. This is really important. I have no issue with the Ungols being gone if they are very specifically saving the Ungols for a DLC. Because you'll notice there are no hags or hag mothers in this, despite the fact they are mentioned in, I think, Kostaltin's lore piece. They actually do talk about the hags. So the hags are still, they still exist. They're still canon. But the only thing I can think, if there is no Ungol representation, the only thing I can think off the top of my head is that the Ungols are being saved for the Lord Pack DLC. So they're going to release a Lord Pack. It'll have, maybe it'll have some kind of Baba Yaga figure. That would be cool. And it introduces hag mothers, hag witches, and then just Ungol units. Because honestly, from a Gospodar perspective, the roster feels done. They have all the Gospodar units. And literally the only unit in the roster that I would say, okay, that is 100% an Ungol unit, was the Horse Archers. But I could see them arguing that, oh, no, these are like the normal Horse Archers. But, like, it says they patrol the Oblast and stuff. I don't know, they come off as very Ungol-y to me. And so do the Kossovite Dervishes. Those two units feel very heavily Ungol, to not call them Ungols. But who knows? Maybe they'll be like, nah. Like, here are the actual Ungol units. And if they did that, I'd be totally cool with that. In which case, like, if that happened, I would bump my rating up to like an 8.5. Or maybe a 9. Nah, I don't know. I'm missing that Caterin sled. 8.5. But as it currently stands, I'd put us around like a 7.5 to 8. So thank you all again for watching. Let me know what you thought. See you guys next time. Bye.